Hi everyone, this is Missy David from Honeybee Mama, where I'm empowering mothers to have the birth experiences that they truly want. My goal is to show you that you do not have to be afraid of childbirth and that you can have the birth experience that you truly desire. I do that by using simple and effective training techniques and by getting you all of the tools and resources that you need to be empowered and to make informed decisions about your birth experience. Today, I want to talk about helping you to know what you really want when it comes to medical decisions and how to communicate your desires to medical professionals. The tool that I'm using today is called the Groopman Spectrum. And the person who shared this with me is Kim James, and she has given me permission to use this tool as well as other doulas and childbirth educators. But I want to make sure that you know who she is, and you should check out her website at kimjames.net. She is an amazing childbirth educator and a speaker, and she also is the creator of Doula Match. I am very passionate about making sure that women understand all of their choices and options in childbirth because I feel that choice unlocks opportunity. You don't know what's possible until you know what's possible. This is a huge reason why I developed the birth experience childbirth training system and manual for both students and my doula clients. It's really a unique way of helping parents and their partners and families really understand what it is that they want and understand their options. A lot of times we don't really know what we want until we know the things that are possible. On the same token, it's really important to understand who you are and why you are unique. Regardless of how much information I give you about what options are available, if they don't mesh with you on a gut level, and if you don't really identify with any of those choices, you might tell me that you want one thing based on the academic knowledge that you have about the childbirth process or about the specific hospital intervention. But when it comes down to it, if your doctor or nurse presents a different option that connects with you on a gut level, you may end up veering off of your birth plan, but it's something that actually makes sense to you, even though you may have made a prior decision against that intervention. So I think it's really important to understand your DNA, and that will help you navigate some of your decisions and help you to be able to communicate with your partner and with your family and with your doctor and your medical staff as well. So the first scale that we're going to look at is Naturalist versus Technologist. This is a linear scale. You can think of it as a scale from 1 to 10, or just think of neutral or 0 being in the middle, and then think of where you are if you are way on the scale of Naturalist or way on the scale of Technologist. If you're on the naturalist side of things, the statements that might describe you best would be number 1, I believe the best cure comes from nature, time, and a healthy lifestyle. Another statement that might describe you would be, I prefer herbal and plant-based remedies, or I prefer age-old remedies. If you're on the technologist side, some statements that you might identify with would be, I believe the best cure comes from science and technology, or I prefer Western drugs and medicine, and I prefer the latest high-tech options. If you lean towards the naturalist side of the spectrum, do you identify with those statements occasionally, most of the time, or yes, definitely? Or are you completely neutral? If you lean towards the technologist side of the spectrum, do you identify with those statements occasionally, most of the time, or yes, definitely? Or are you completely neutral? The next spectrum that we're going to look at is the minimalist versus maximalist. If you're a minimalist, some statements that you might identify with would be, I believe less is best, and I prefer the minimal amount of treatment necessary. And also, I avoid treatment. If you're on the maximalist side of things, some statements that you might identify with would be, I believe more is best. I prefer the maximum amount of treatment possible. Or I seek preemptive treatment. Take a moment and decide. If you're on the minimalist side, do you identify with those statements occasionally, most of the time, or yes, definitely, all the time. If you're on the maximalist side, do you agree with those statements occasionally, most of the time, or yes, definitely? Or are you neutral on these statements? The last spectrum that we're going to look at is doubter versus believer. If you're on the doubter side of the spectrum, some statements that you might identify with would be, I am skeptical that treatment will work, or I worry about the potential side effects and risks, and I am skeptical of healthcare providers. If you're on the believer side of things, some statements you might identify with would be, I believe all treatment will work, or I focus on the expected benefits, and I hold healthcare providers in high esteem. If you are on the doubter side of the spectrum, do you agree with those statements occasionally, most of the time, or yes, definitely? Or are you neutral? If you're on the believer side of things, decide whether you agree with those statements occasionally, most of the time, or yes, definitely, all the time. Once you have figured out if you're a naturalist, a technologist, a minimalist, a maximalist, doubter, believer, just know that you don't have to only be things on one side, and you may have already discovered this. You don't have to be a naturalist and a minimalist and a believer. You may be a naturalist, but a maximalist and a believer. Or you may be a technologist and a maximalist and a doubter. A woman who chooses to give birth in a hospital with an OB and who also wants a low intervention birth could be a believer with a minimalist mindset who also is high on the technology spectrum. Doubters may hire doulas because they want a buffer against their doctor's suggestions, but they also may doubt the doula's recommendation and efficacy. A maximalist might hire a doula, but also want an epidural. So you can see from all of these different situations that just because you are a naturalist person, it doesn't mean that you want the least amount of interventions. You may want a lot of interventions, but you want them to all be natural. Just because you hire a doula doesn't mean you aren't still skeptical of her advice as well as other people's advice. It's important to understand where you are on the spectrum of things so that as you're making decisions about your birth experience, you are able to be comfortable with wherever it is that you are. Because when it comes down to it in that highly emotional and intimate experience, you're going to make the decisions that make most sense to your DNA. During labor and birth, the thinking part of our brains are not working as much as the feeling and more primal part of our brain. During that time, if you're asked to make decisions, you're going to make decisions that really connect with you on a gut level. You're not going to be able to make decisions based on all the information as well as you would maybe before birth. So understanding your natural inclinations helps you to be more flexible and make better choices for yourself and help the people around you also make good choices for you and with you. So when you get to the point that you write your birth plan and you're discussing things with your physician, make sure that you tell them what it is that you want, but also why. For example, if you want the least amount of interventions because you are a minimalist, explain that to them. Just explain, you know what, I feel like the least amount of interventions are necessary. I'm a minimalist. More stuff freaks me out or stresses me out, and so I would like less, and that's a reason why I'm asking for less interventions. This way, when you're coming to talk to your physician or nurse or partner or friends or doula about your decisions for your birth experience, you can help explain to them why. Instead of saying, I want this intervention or I don't want this intervention because of all of these stats and because I read this in this book, you'll be able to own your decision more fully by saying, I want this and this is why, because I'm this kind of a person and this is what makes sense to me. And the more ownership you have over your birth experience, the better you're going to feel about it. If you have any questions about any of this information, I would love for you to leave me a comment or shoot me an email at tulsadoula@gmail.com. Leave me a comment on my Facebook page at facebook.com/honeybeemama or leave a comment on this blog post. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear your questions and comments. Remember, this is your birth and your baby. Nobody gets to do anything to you or to your baby that you don't give them permission to do. Just make sure that the decisions that you're making are based on facts and not based on fear. Until next time, I'm sending you lots of love and honey from Honeybee Mama.